What if America woke up tomorrow and the Gulf of Mexico was off limits? No oil rigs. No shrimp boats. No cargo ships. No naval patrols. Just a vast body of water surrounded by restricted access, economic lockdown, and geopolitical paralysis. The Gulf of Mexico, often seen as just a warm vacation coastline or a place where hurricanes brew, is actually one of the most strategically vital regions to the United States. Lose it, and America loses a huge part of its power. Let's imagine the scenario. A sudden closure, perhaps due to a hostile takeover, a natural disaster that renders the Gulf inaccessible, or even a total collapse of diplomatic ties with key neighbors. Whatever the cause, the US no longer has the ability to use the Gulf for economic, military, or environmental purposes. The ripple effects would be enormous and immediate. First, let's talk about oil. The Gulf of Mexico is a critical hub for offshore oil drilling. According to the US Energy Information Administration, offshore platforms in the Gulf produce about 15% of all US crude oil. That's millions of barrels per day. In 2023 alone, over 1.8 million barrels of oil and 2.1 billion cubic feet of natural gas were produced daily from offshore operations. If the US were to lose access to these sites, it wouldn't just lose energy, it would lose control. Energy prices would skyrocket overnight, not just in the US, but globally. The shock to the markets would be severe, with inflation spiraling as transportation, manufacturing, and even agriculture faced rising costs. The US Strategic Petroleum Reserve could provide a temporary buffer, but that reserve is limited, and it was not designed to handle the permanent loss of such a massive supply source. Import dependency would return, with more oil needing to be sourced from volatile regions like the Middle East or Venezuela. The geopolitical leverage the US currently holds thanks to its energy independence would disappear. Now consider the ports. The Port of Houston is one of the busiest in the United States. Handling over 270 million tons of cargo annually, it's a gateway not just for oil but also for chemicals, food, consumer goods, and raw materials. If Gulf access were lost, Houston's port, and others like New Orleans, Tampa, and Mobile, would be rendered useless. These cities would suffer immediate economic devastation. Tens of thousands of jobs would be lost. Entire industries would collapse. Shipping traffic would need to be rerouted to the east and west coasts, but these ports are already congested and would struggle to absorb the overflow. Supply chains would buckle under the pressure, causing shortages across the country. Everyday goods from bananas to electronics would either become scarce or prohibitively expensive. Fishing and seafood industries would collapse overnight. The Gulf accounts for nearly 40% of all seafood harvested in the United States. Shrimp, oysters, red snapper, entire ecosystems would be economically severed. Fishermen from Texas to Florida would be out of work, and restaurants across the nation would feel the pinch. Prices would spike, imports would increase, and a centuries-old maritime culture would vanish. Tourism would also take a massive hit. The Gulf Coast is home to some of the country's most popular beach destinations: Galveston, Gulf Shores, Destin, Tampa, and countless others. If the Gulf were closed, beaches would empty, cruise ships would reroute, and the multi-billion-dollar tourism economy would crash. Beyond economics, the environmental consequences would be dire. The Gulf of Mexico is a delicate ecosystem. It supports thousands of species and plays a vital role in regulating regional climate. If the US loses access, it loses the ability to monitor, protect, and manage these environments. That means unchecked pollution, unregulated fishing, and environmental degradation that could spread beyond the Gulf. There's also the hurricane factor. The Gulf acts as a buffer zone, a place where the US can monitor and respond to hurricanes forming off the coast. Without access, early warning systems would be compromised. Response times would increase. Damage from hurricanes could become more devastating as preparedness drops. Coastal resilience would plummet. Then we come to the military implications. The Gulf of Mexico is a major operational zone for the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. Naval bases in Florida, Texas, and Louisiana provide rapid deployment for national and international missions. The Gulf is not just a training ground, it's a defense perimeter. If access were lost, the U.S. would have a massive blind spot along its southern flank. Surveillance would weaken. Smuggling and illegal immigration would rise. Worst of all, rival powers, like China or Russia, could seek to influence the region, especially if Cuba or other Caribbean nations invited them in. The U.S. would also lose strategic access to the Panama Canal, a key artery for military and trade movements. While technically outside the Gulf, it's heavily connected through Gulf ports and naval logistics. Without that connection, the U.S. would be forced to reroute naval operations through far more vulnerable and less efficient paths. Let's pause here for a moment. Could America survive this? Yes, but not without massive change. Losing the Gulf wouldn't mean collapse, but it would mean transformation. America would need to invest heavily in its rail systems to move goods overland. It would need to ramp up east and west coast ports with billions in infrastructure upgrades. It would need new energy strategies, more renewables, more shale, more imports. And diplomatically, it would need to forge stronger alliances to compensate for its lost southern flank. What do you think would be the most damaging consequence of losing the Gulf of Mexico? Economic collapse, military vulnerability, or environmental disaster? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This isn't science fiction. Parts of this scenario have played out in smaller ways before. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010 temporarily crippled energy production and devastated marine ecosystems. Hurricane Katrina showed what happens when Gulf infrastructure fails. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, supply chain breakdowns hinted at what a port shutdown might look like. But those were blips, recoverable events. Losing the Gulf entirely would be something else. It would permanently alter America's role in the world. No longer the hub of energy production. No longer the center of hemispheric trade. No longer the uncontested naval power in the region. We often think of power in terms of armies, dollars, or elections. But geography is power too. And few geographies are as powerful to the United States as the Gulf of Mexico. It's not just a body of water, it's a lifeline. Imagine it gone. What happens next? Could the US survive without the Gulf of Mexico? Or would it reshape the nation forever? Leave a comment, hit like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more geography-driven insights into global power.